Stop. Friendly fire. Chapter 8. I felt it this time. That I can't just go on like this. That was the first thing Jin said. Running was everything to me in my past life, but continuing to just run in this world is nothing more than escapism. That's what I felt when I saw you and Jin. Well, probably. Shin Woo agreed, uninterested. Of course, because of that, his running-related skills had increased, but that's just a byproduct of him escaping reality. In order to survive in this world, and in order to advance forward, one needed to fight. Tell me, how did you, even after becoming an undead, so quickly adapt to this world and proceed forward? And if you can, please help me so I can become like that too. For free? No. Jin strongly shook his head, but it seemed like he was really hesitating with his follow-up. Shin Woo had already roughly anticipated Jin's request, so he could understand his hesitation. How long did he wait like that? Jin sighed deeply and spoke. I'll let you ride on my back. It should be helpful for travel as well as battle, right? In other words, it's an offer to party up. Yeah. Jin was originally a human. For him to have offered to let someone else ride on his back must have caused him to give up a lot of things. It was no different from him throwing away precious evidence that he was human. He was willing to go that far in order to advance further. It seems like it's way worse for me, but, yeah, your speed is definitely helpful. Honestly, I did need someone to talk to. All right, let's work together. Then, ga. Jin sounded relieved, yet he saw Shin Woo straighten his index finger. Jin, who had seen this very index finger burrow into the acid ghoul and explode, couldn't help but flinch. Still, accepting you without any hesitation right now isn't best for either of us. Then, here. Shin Woo passed Jin a tattered sack. Jin obediently accepted it and tilted his head while holding it in his teeth. Shin Woo smiled faintly and spoke. If you hunt skeletons or undead like zombies, they usually drop perium and bones. Come back after filling that sack to the brim with bones. That's my condition. The blue goblin fire, that acted as substitutes for his eyes, shook strongly, as if expressing his doubt. To think that it was possible to express his emotions through goblin fire, Shin Woo was extremely jealous of that. When he becomes level 4, will goblin fire fill his empty eye sockets? It's all for your sake, so fill the sack. The higher the monster's level, the better. But, I got it. So it's a test. It seemed like Jin was definitely misunderstanding. He thought Shin Woo was testing him, testing whether he had the right to accompany him, or checking if he had the resolve to hunt monsters. Of course, when bone reinforcement became level 4, he became able to apply it to others as well, so he just planned to use all the bones that Jin gathered to strengthen him all at once, imparting the undead's knowledge and experiences onto him. You'll definitely be able to become as experienced as me in no time. That sounds impossible, but I got it. I'll show you that I wasn't ignoring those undead until now because I was scared. Perhaps it was because he was an athlete in his past life, as Jin's spirit was considerable. The experience of taking down the acid ghoul may have instilled him with confidence. Come back here once you've filled it to the brim. If you can, do some quests. Since doing quests is the only way to unlock things like the inventory or the chatting channel. I got it. And also take this. Jin stuck out his neck. There was a small pouch hanging on his neck, and after taking it off, Shin Woo found 50,000 perium inside, as well as 5 LV3 equipment reinforcement permits. It's just what I got as the quest reward, but it's useless to me. It's cumbersome, so you take it. It seems like the skill book had already disappeared, as he learned the skill, but it seems like he couldn't do anything with these. Since Shin Woo wasn't the type to refuse something offered, he immediately took them. It should be fine to take this in advance, considering what I'm going to do for you in the future. No, it's nothing. It's likely that Jin still wasn't familiar with karma. Shin Woo smiled bitterly and shook his head. Since he didn't have a clear understanding of karma, he wouldn't understand, even if Shin Woo tried explaining it to him with words. Then get going. If you can, try to get level 2 bones or higher. That'll be good for you, too. No matter how bad I am at fighting, I should be able to take them down if they're level 2. I got it. As soon as I fill the sack, I'll come back. Okay. Jin nodded his head for some time, turned around, and then ran straight forward. His speed was greater than any monsters that he had encountered since being dropped into the Empire. With that speed, even if he were to meet the acid ghoul again, he wouldn't die. In an instant, he was unable to see Jin's appearance, and soon after, Shin Woo activated bone reinforcement on the acid ghoul's thumbnail. By sacrificing the acid ghoul's thumbnail, both hands are reinforced. Strength and health have increased by 3, and magic by 5. Absorbing a portion of the acid ghoul's memories and experiences. This seems like the wrong method, Doctor. This isn't it. This test is a failure. We can't stop it. Edward L. Baker. The amount of stats was also immense, but when he felt the flowing memories, he felt cold, as if he had just swallowed a block of ice whole. This was a record of their struggle. A record of their struggle to not become undead. So that's how it was. They realized that they wouldn't be able to prevent the curse that ruined the Empire, and they researched for a method to not become the undead. However, they failed, and instead, they put their hands on poison, and as a result, became a zombie that spurts acid poison. There was something he thought of when talking about poison and zombies. Hadn't he obtained a deteriorated poison zombie's bone in the sewers? Moreover, the slimes bore poison as well. As soon as he wondered whether there was something remaining in the sewers that connected the two, he couldn't sit still at all. However, before that, Shin Woo had suddenly acquired 10 LV3 equipment reinforcement permits, and used one of them to reinforce the dire wolf's bone armor. The armor, which looked as though it would break any minute now, instantly returned to its original form and was reinforced. Dire wolf bone armor +1. LV3. Durability 850/850ths. Defense 110 to 125. Options: increases health by 21. Next up is Shin Woo prepared for the future, where his equipment would get damaged, and separately stored 1 reinforcement permit. He used the remaining 8 all at once to reinforce his bone of thunder lasting. While his armor only really possessed the ability to protect his body, his sword had a hidden power related to bursting thunder. Bone of thunder lasting +8. LV3. Durability 1070/1070ths. Attack power 260 to 280. Options: strength +19, magic +19, effectiveness of bursting thunder skill +18%. Ooh. As expected of a weapon that God herself bestowed, though it had changed, it certainly was different from other weapons. The more he repeated the reinforcement, the more absurdly the attack power grew. It was this strong at +8, and he felt that it had reached values that would enable it to outclass even level 4 weapons. And that was the same for the stats as well. There was definitely a noticeable difference in strength depending on whether one equipped the weapon or not. It was to the point that around now, he thought that perhaps the true reward for saving a hero were the reinforcement permits. However, since I've received something so amazing, if I don't help that guy considerably, I won't be able to deal with the shortage of karma. Plain doesn't speak idly. It'll leave a bad taste in my mouth if I'm just on the receiving end. But, well, that problem should be solved at around the time he meets Jin again. Since he was sure that bone reinforcement's karma wasn't trifling. Anyway, if he doesn't have bone reinforcement, what skill did he get from God? Shin Woo briefly pondered on that subject. It was something he'd realized after being brought into the Empire. Everything had karma, and karma is never something to be taken lightly. In exchange for becoming an undead, he gained 100 lives, as well as a reinforcement ability using bones, so Jin should have gotten something around the same level. Of course, Jin had started at level 4, contrary to Shin Woo, so he probably had to take that into consideration as well. I should ask when he gets back. Shin Woo shrugged his shoulders, brushed away thoughts regarding Jin, checked the results of his stats, and swung his sword in the air a few times. He trembled, as he felt as though his sword cleaved the air in half, and nodded his head. Even though he knew it was ominous, he couldn't help but mutter like this for the second time. "I'm not afraid of anything anymore." He immediately went into the underground tunnel he had dug and returned to the dungeon. He was able to return more quickly and easily than he had anticipated. You possess the dungeon permit. All stats within the dungeon increase by 15. Now then, let's completely clear the dungeon before Jin comes back. However, as if it were ridiculing his thoughts, the interior of the sewers was extremely silent and dark. Even if there were level 2 slimes crawling around, he trusted that there was nothing unusual going on, but in a different sense, he felt betrayed. Well, this is disappointing. He wanted to familiarize himself with his strengthened body and go wild, but he didn't feel comfortable with that idea at all. However, the instant he thought so and sighed, he saw something glowing in the darkness. Goo. It was a sound he'd heard somewhere before. What was it? Before he even organized his thoughts, the dominating sense of danger caused Shin Woo to instinctually dive out of the way. A huge shot hit the ground just a little later. It emitted a horrific sound. Goo! You bastard! After Shin Woo figured out the identity of that shot, he simply smiled bitterly and felt dejected. How could he not? This was a great slime, an enemy that he had risked his life fighting before finding this passageway. LV3 Great Slime. I thought it was the boss before, but now they're just appearing in the passageway wherever. Shin Woo wasn't sure if it knew that he had fought one of its kin before, but after it impacted the ground, it rolled into a ball again, and got ready for another leap. However, compared to when he had first faced the great slime in the clearing, Shin Woo didn't really feel that uneasy. I can see its movements better. Goo! It bounced its body quickly and forcefully charged. What's worse, the slime spun midair and was rotating. He hadn't noticed that when he had fought the slime from before. However, now I can. Shin Woo moved nimbly, the moment that the slime aimed for him and flew towards him. Combat Sprint. It didn't simply enable one to move fast, it would increase the body's reaction speed, albeit for a short time. It felt as if he was the only one moving quickly within the slowed time. One's senses would disappear in the time it would take to say, ah, but within that time, Shin Woo moved in the best way possible. Hup! He raised his sword, which he had hardened, pointed it at the slime, and with the strength of power slash behind it, precisely slashed the slime. He couldn't even think of fighting it straight up before, but this time, he was doing just that. Of course, the impact of their collision was tremendous, but he could endure it. His strength stat, which rose to 150 after the dungeon bonus, as well as his equipment bonus, enabled him to stand his ground. Goo! Ultimately, the slime hadn't inflicted effective damage onto him, and conversely bounced up, colliding with the ceiling. Even though it hadn't been cleaved by his sword strike, the moment the damaged area impacted with the ceiling, a considerable amount of mucus splattered down. Then, an acid mist spread out, but since he had fought the acid ghoul, he didn't even really feel this level of acid poison. That was good. Let's keep going like this. Whoa! Goo! Just now, he felt it. Rather than fighting weaklings to train, it was naturally better to fight monsters equally as strong as him, or even stronger, in order to get stronger much more quickly. Shin Woo saw the great slime repair its wound, as well as its body becoming smaller, and his eyes gleamed, while once more raising his sword. It wouldn't be unreasonable to say that around the time that he could comfortably fight a great slime face to face without using the flames of revenge, he would be qualified to reach level 4, would it? I'm going. Goo! The giant slime and the skeleton clashed again. A fierce roar resounded through the dungeon, breathing life into the once silent dungeon. Gururururuk. You have hunted a LV3 Great Slime. You have acquired 9,350 Perium. You have acquired a LV2 Old Thorn Bone Spear, +3. You have acquired a Great Slime Bone Core. That was easier than I thought it would be. After roughly 10 minutes of intense battle, Shin Woo had emerged victorious in a face-to-face confrontation. Of course, he was injured in the process, but it was to an extent that he could easily heal with only one use of his regeneration. His equipment was fine as well. In the end, he had used flames in order to squeeze out a core, but by that time it was already dying, so he could safely say that he had killed it with only his sword. Now, shall we use bone rain? Goo! Goo! There was a problem that came around the time he finished up the terrific battle and collected the reward. Due to the battle, he had expanded the passageway, and 2 great slimes rushed in all at once. LV3 Great Slime. LV3 Great Slime. What the hell? It was indeed a LV2 Elite Dungeon, and he wondered what it would be like if 3 LV3 Elite monsters had appeared in the same area. But now wasn't the time to be thinking about that. The great slimes were strong enough to break his bone joints the moment he was careless. 2 versus 1. I don't really need to work myself too hard right now. Shin Woo quickly made a decision. As soon as they saw him, they went into a frenzy and bounced their bodies around. He avoided their charges and ignited his flames of revenge. While doing so, he suddenly thought perhaps it might work, then attempted to create a flame on both hands, and ended up succeeding. Of course, it wasn't very difficult for him to accurately hit either slimes with the flames. Even if they weren't great slimes and were emperor slimes, they wouldn't be able to avoid the flames of revenge's homing ability. Goo! Goo! The flames of revenge were significantly larger than before. Was it due to that? Normally, there would be a delay in between them getting hit by the flame and recognizing the danger, and exploding after. But they didn't even do that this time and immediately tried to explode. Hup! He made a split-second decision and immediately activated his combat sprint, leaping high into the sky. Before he collided with the ceiling, he forcefully lodged his sword diagonally. Perhaps it was because his body was made of bones or that he was so light, but the sword made no sign of slipping out, allowing him to hang safely. Immediately after, a huge explosion occurred. Quang! Let's see. Shin Woo hung onto the ceiling and after toughening his feet through harden, he kicked away all the pieces flying towards him. His feet spun around like a windmill while kicking away the pieces. It was something he himself had done, but it felt like he was watching some kind of movie. I just thought it was a lot better than getting hit, so I tried it, but it actually does work. His visual acuity had definitely grown as his agility went up. Even when he was level 2, he couldn't believe it, but now, he could read the trajectory as well as the speed of the pieces, match them, and respond accordingly. Of course, he couldn't kick them all away, so he was hit by a few of them, but that was only about 5% of fragments. And that was no longer at a level that could really hurt him. Then shall we start in earnest? However, when he was confident that had skillfully handled the explosion, and was about to proceed with his next move, Shin Woo realized that a strangle phenomenon was occurring from below. It was the great slime's behavior. They were going to explode again. Now that I think about it, the flames on their bodies aren't going out. Of course, the flames of revenge were tenacious, but all they had to do was tear off the piece that was aflame. Then, why were they still burning? The answer? It was due to their self-destruct skills which didn't discriminate between friend or foe. The fragments that were burning from the flames of revenge were spread everywhere, and the other slime that was in close proximity was struck without warning and began to burn once more. As a result, their bodies shrunk in size and they took damage. What's worse, the flames were shifted and they began to burn again. They're really dumb, aren't they? He thought, hanging there vacantly, and while he was thinking, the slimes raised their magic and self-destructed again. However, Shin Woo was still hanging from the ceiling, and was even more easily kicking away the pieces than last time. His combat sprint sharpened his senses, so it wasn't difficult at all. The low-rank combat sprint skill has become LV6. Agility has increased by 3. You can activate the skill faster, and you can maintain the skill for a longer period of time. As Shin Woo kicked away the incoming Great Slime's fragments, he felt a thrilling pleasure. Did he always like moving his body around this much? It may be the influence of someone else, someone's bone he had absorbed through bone reinforcement. Whether it was his original personality or not, he was sure that at some point he began to enjoy personally moving his body and fighting, as well as learning skills through experience. And that personality was something that was extremely beneficial in surviving in the underground empire. Gu. After completing their second self-destruct, rather than completely extinguishing the flames actually expanded. At around that point, the great slimes realized that the situation wasn't as simple as it would seem. Shin Woo thought it'd be funny if they repeatedly used their self-destruct and died, but it didn't actually go that way. The slimes, which had focused only on Shin Woo, turned to each other for the first time. They realized that they were the targets of the flames. Gu. And they soon did something astonishing. One of the great slime's mucousy body opened just like a mouth and ate the other one. Even as the flames melted their bodies, they softly connected their magic cores together and fused into one whilst emitting sparks, a truly magnificent sight. A LV3 Great Slime has fused with a similar organism. LV3 Great Slime, +3. There was a reinforcing mark on a monster. Shin Woo was astonished and couldn't believe the sight. The great slimes, which had become one, had become bigger. They would have compressed their mana centrally in their bodies in the process of self-destructing, so their abilities would have doubled, and pushed the flames onto the outer portion of its body, self-destructing once more. As a result, it returned to its pristine form once again. Gu. Of course, while it was fusing, Shin Woo had dislodged his sword from the ceiling and dropped down. He activated his stealth and was already hiding within the darkness, but his sight didn't leave the fused and strengthened great slime. Perhaps the reason that there are great slimes in this dungeon is because they're the result of the originally low-leveled slimes repeatedly fusing together over a long period of time. If that's the case, then he could understand why this dungeon, which was originally supposed to be level 1, had become a level 2 elite dungeon. Shin Woo had unintentionally come across one of the truths about the dungeon and felt extremely strange. Gu. Meanwhile, the great slime, +3, lost Shin Woo and thoroughly searched the passageway while perplexed. Shin Woo matched its movements and repeatedly moved back into hiding, so it couldn't easily find him. The slime's senses were so dull that it wouldn't notice him unless he made a huge noise or there was a huge rush of mana. Gu. It soon gave up on finding Shin Woo and turned around. However, it didn't appear as though it was returning back to its everyday life. It realized that there was an enemy in the silent sewers and had become more aggressive after fusing. In other words, it was focused on getting stronger in preparation for the next time they met. This has become interesting. Shin Woo slowly crawled through the dark passageway and felt conflicted as he watched the back of the slime. He already knew that killing it now would be the safest option. However, if it somehow fused with all the slimes inhabiting this dungeon, or even just the great slimes, he wanted to see the result. It might even become a level 4 elite monster like the acid ghoul. Of course, it may not become as strong as the acid ghoul, but in any case, if he let it be, a formidable slime would become even more formidable. The risk of dying would increase by that much, yet Shin Woo couldn't help but want to see a monster like that be born. It'd obviously be dangerous, but the reward should reflect that danger and be considerable as well. Shin Woo already knew the rewards a level 4 elite monster would drop. The rewards that were a level higher than that of a level 3 monster. It wasn't just the loot. In the process of fighting an enemy of a higher level, all his actions would become a strong karma and would come back to repay him. That's what happened when he had fought the acid ghoul together with the other heroes, too. One would get solo rewards if they fight alone, and if fought with others, they'll be rewarded together. In this world, levels were an absolute standard, so by exceeding that very standard, he would obtain a karma that went beyond his imagination. And that would advance his growth beyond the norm. So much so that he wouldn't lose to his seniors, or the undead that filled the empire. If the other heroes heard him, They would ask if he were carrying around a few spare lives and would be amazed, but honestly, he couldn't help it, he did have extra lives. Several dozen of them at that. You have acquired a target for the beginner Avenger skill. When you meet again, all abilities increase by 30%. Around the time the great slime had went beyond the clearing and disappeared, a message quietly appeared in front of him. Everything was set, he would be able to defeat the evolved slime. He felt really satisfied that he had gotten this skill from his own actions and the resulting karma, rather than anyone else's bones. And about the trickster. By accidentally receiving the savior karma, he now only needed one more token in the future. At the end of that, what karma would he acquire? He was sure that he wasn't very far off. For now, bone reinforcement. The entire body is reinforced. You have acquired 3 magic. Proficiency in low-rank self-destruct has increased by 10%, absorbing a portion of the target's memories and experiences. Goo! Great slime. TCH, since I've risen to level 3, the amount of stats it gives me has decreased. Shin Woo, who had finished with the bone reinforcement, concluded that it was a good decision to let the great slime go, and after nodding his head, started to proceed through the dark sewer passageway. Of course, while maintaining his low-rank stealth. Did the great slime, +3, already wipe out all of the slimes as it passed by? It was so silent that it felt as though his noisy fight at the beginning with the great slimes was a lie. Moreover, this place conversely doesn't have any filth. Ah, was it all melted by the acid? When a slime becomes a great slime, the acid that it spews out becomes stronger. It would melt solids and evaporate liquids. The slimes that spew out this horrific acid were crawling around, so it was only natural that the sewers become clean. But around this time, he wondered why the sewer passageway was still left intact. I know it's tough, but the fact that the preparations were this thorough, perhaps the Empire treated it as though it was natural for slimes to appear in the sewers. When the Empire flourished, he wondered what it looked like, and suddenly couldn't get it out of his mind. He would probably never know, and he smiled bitterly. That's roughly what he imagined his expression was, and continued to explore. However, while he was exploring, he discovered a crack carved into a portion of the left passageway. When he thoroughly inspected it, he found that the crack was in the shape of a square, and it was a size that could comfortably fit the palm of his hand. And at the center, he saw the traces of hidden mana. They seemed to be extremely old. Is this perhaps? It looked like a fingerprint scanner that showed up in movies. Shin Woo pondered briefly, but soon placed his hand atop the square. Then, the square pattern surprisingly emitted heat and slightly came out. Beyond any doubt, it was a lock. Who? Shin Woo was excited, thinking that he'd found a secret hidden within the dungeon, and immediately emitted mana, but the reaction wasn't great. The door lock turned red, and emitted an ominous light, though that was all. Nothing else really changed. Of course, he had roughly expected that. It was a lock, so there was no way it'd open by just emitting a bit of mana. However, be that as it may, he thought that this structure didn't just respond to a certain individual's mana alone. That's because he could faintly, very faintly, feel the traces of mana from a variety of humans that had stood before this very lock. Then, is it a pattern as expected? Unlocking it had now become difficult. It had probably been dozens of years since the last time this lock was activated, and was so terribly worn out to the point that it'd be difficult to ascertain the origin of the traces of the time-worn mana. The saving grace was that there were countless traces of people's mana, and their strands of mana all overlapped. If he were able to analyze the flow of mana, he felt as though he'd obtain a meaningful result. It'll probably be a lot of work, but, shall we? There should still be some time left before the great slime cleans up this dungeon. Shin Woo concentrated on the door lock and began to thoroughly analyze the traces of the faintly remaining mana. Figuring out a starting point is important. Yeah, here. No, is it here? He saw the conditions of opening the lock as follows. Draw the mana to the center of the palm, and use that mana to create one pattern. Of course, it wasn't just that it had to be the same pattern, but it had to flow from the same starting place and end at the same ending place. He genuinely activated his senses, and by analyzing the door lock's release conditions, he found and excluded the false traces that they had purposefully put in. He had fun, as it felt as though he was playing some sort of puzzle game. The low-rank magic accumulation skill has become LV2. Magic has increased by 2. It goes up. It was the same process as when entering a dungeon, so perhaps by just carrying out these tasks, his proficiency in magic-related skills would increase. Shin Woo, who was motivated to improve his skills and stats, didn't even know how amazing what he was doing was, and continuously analyzed the lock. And then, he finally succeeded in determining the pattern. The low-rank magic affinity skill has become LV8. Magic has increased by 5. It's a skull. What completely bad taste. He knew approximately what the people who had gathered here came for. However, to think that the pattern that they used was a skull, the laughter came out naturally. It definitely should have been fairly difficult to get through, though. In any case, I just need to find the starting point and the end point now. They had gone so far as to hide it in the sewers and even maintain thorough security over it, so he probably wouldn't get through scot-free if he got this wrong. Shin Woo took a deep breath and concentrated even harder on the pattern. To be exact, he concentrated on the flow from the traces of mana that the humans had left behind dozens of years prior. However, there was no way it'd be that simple. Damn it. He gritted his teeth. Shin Woo thought he might have been too arrogant to attempt this, as someone who hasn't handled mana for very long. However, despite that, he couldn't give up at all. In the end, it was pretty much a miracle finding the right pattern. He had no choice but to trust in his talent and concentrate right now. Shin Woo concentrated more forcefully on the pattern, even more than when he had taken the National College entrance exam, and at that moment, he miraculously succeeded in grabbing a hold of a faintly remaining flow of mana. It was truly a small trace, but it seemed as though some traces of mana were being absorbed into the pattern. Shin Woo could even go as far as to guess the owner of that mana, and he had very briefly assimilated their experiences. It was none other than the magician, Jarrett, who had burnt and killed his zombified teacher. Wait, it's the opposite. Since it was a trace from Jarrett, I was able to recognize it. I also experienced sharing a body with him as well, and, more importantly, the fact that Jarrett came here means that this facility is related to General Segald. He knew that Jarrett wanted to meet with General Segald from the memories of the bone he had acquired. It was a facility within the interior of the sewers where they performed some kind of research, and Segald and Jarrett. He couldn't be sure of anything yet, but Shin Woo drew a truly persuasive scenario in his head. Then let's uncover what the secret is. Since he had uncovered a trace of the flow of mana, it was easy to find the rest of the traces. In his head, a series of streams of mana were cleanly connected. I got it. He inwardly yelled with delight and placed his hand carefully on the door lock, and after going through the simulations in his head several times and making sure, reproduced that flow. The slightly black-dyed mana slowly and carefully started to create the pattern of a skull. Eventually, the pattern was completed, and thankfully the door lock didn't become hot. It emitted a delicate blue light, and soon was sucked back into the wall. At that moment, a larger square pattern appeared. It was a door that allowed him to enter the secret room. Releasing door lock. It was a miracle. He had revived something from several years ago. A part of lost history had been revived due to Shin Woo, and it was at that moment that the mana within his body intensified, surged, and exploded. The countless, dormant knowledge fragments and his talent connected, causing a big bang that he couldn't contain. You have acquired the passive skill, Magic Tracking LV1. Magic has increased by 3. Low-rank magic affinity, low-rank magic accumulation, and low-rank magic tracking skills have compounded and evolved. His ability to sense magic, accept it, and track it were all connected into one. A method of more effectively producing mana, circulating it, and utilizing it instinctually rose up into his head. It was something that he couldn't have even dreamed of until now, as well as being absurdly complex and headache-inducing, but it was possible for him now. Shin Woo nodded his head and accepted the mysterious feeling. He accumulated the knowledge and applied it. You have acquired the special passive skill, low-rank Mana Bone LV5. Magic has increased by 30. At that moment, mana indiscriminately spread through his body, covered his bones, and caused a fundamental change. Low-rank Mana Bone LV5, passive. Originally, humans were organisms that did not welcome mana, and through their strong tenacity as well as their talent, they realized a method to harmonize with mana. In order to more perfectly handle the mana that spread throughout the body as it pleased, the mana is accepted, created, and circulated by an imaginary organ that covers the heart. They called it the mana heart. However, you are a skeleton without a heart, so you have done something outrageous and substituted the mana heart with your entire bony body. That scale is truly enormous, and if you did not have a considerable understanding and handling of mana, it would have been impossible to even attempt. By achieving a balance between the vast knowledge, your talent in mana, and the special situation, this astonishing skill was born, and no one besides yourself knows the growth potential of this astonishing skill. It was truly an odd feeling. It felt as though he had taken off some unnatural clothes and he'd been thrown into a world filled with mana, naked. His body, composed of 206 bones, was integrated with mana, and each of those individual bones were now more closely connected. Of course, controlling all 206 bones simultaneously while controlling the mana was certainly not easy. Even if he was aided by the skill, there was way too much to focus on at one time, and he was afflicted with pain that felt as though he was being split apart. It wasn't a joke. If he were to lose control and was flooded by the mana, it wouldn't be strange for his bones to shatter. He would have to constantly exert himself to adapt to this skill from now on. The invigorated flow of mana increases the body's reaction speed. The invigorated flow of mana shortens the activation time of all skills. You have successfully absorbed some outside mana and stored it. Mana has increased by 1. However, enduring the pain was bound to lead to sweet rewards. He'd only tasted a portion of it, yet it wasn't hard to realize that the effectiveness of his mana increased by more than several times. Even manifesting, collecting, and producing mana had increased. For the first time, Shin Woo felt like he had the right to call himself a hero. And that qualification wasn't just this. At only level 3, you have acquired a portion of the qualification necessary to walk the path of an archmage, one who naturally commands nature and changes the world. Magic has increased by 20. You have acquired the Archmage's Karma token. Quest complete. You have acquired 1 LV6 Weapon Trickster's Armbone. You have already achieved the Trickster's Karma, but you are merely at the level of a toddler. The more personas you acquire, the more your strength grows. That is the path you have chosen, as well as the karma you have been bestowed. Who? He had just been trying to find the secret room, yet had experienced a sudden change, one that he couldn't dream of. Even after calming down the rushing mana, he momentarily stood still in order to get a hold of himself. Shin Woo kept control of the mana and circulated it. He felt the mana that his bones harmoniously spewed out as well as the resonating external mana so clearly that he thought that he would feel nauseous with the slightest slip. He likened this feeling to that of riding a roller coaster. I'd rather just vomit, but these damn bones won't let me. It wasn't an issue that could be dealt with in a short amount of time, though thankfully it was a problem that could still be solved. Just like how a human isn't usually aware of their breathing or the blinking of their eyes, but still does so naturally, he was training the control of his mana bone skill in order for it to operate unconsciously. Talk is cheap. Shin Woo smiled bitterly and stayed in place for the moment. How much time had passed? At around the time where his head still hurt but he could move it like usual, Shin Woo sighed in relief and checked the bone he had gotten as a reward for the quest. LV6 Weapon Trickster's Armbone. A trickster's armbone that was used as a weapon to cajole their enemies. There is enough recorded within to reform one's existence. Ha! It was overwhelmingly distinctive compared to the other bones he had absorbed thus far. He couldn't suppress his admiration of the bone as he inspected it. It had an awfully large amount of mana within, was obviously extremely tough, and the fact that each of its finger bones was a different shape was especially distinctive. Perhaps the trickster was an existence that didn't need a weapon. He decided that it would be important to figure out how this weapon was connected to the trickster. For now, he'll reinforce. The activation of the skill has failed. You are not prepared to accept the strength within the bone yet. Ah, this pattern finally came up. He was already a bit prepared for this, but since it actually happened, it tasted bitter. If that was going to happen, he wanted to complain and ask why they gave him such a mouth-watering bone at this time, but when he thought about it in another way, he felt like he was that amazing to have cleared a quest that was so far above his level. Well, it should be possible soon. If bone reinforcement couldn't accept it, then he would have to forget about this bone for now. Shin Woo inspected the bone with a deeply regretful expression, and in the end, put it into his inventory. Well, he already had his hands full adapting to and applying the mana bone skill he had just awakened. It might have actually turned out well for him. Shin Woo convinced himself of this and raised his head. The secret door that had revealed itself for the first time in dozens of years looked worn out. All right. Shin Woo firmly resolved himself and placed his hand atop the door. The door silently rose up, to the point that it was difficult to believe that it had lain undisturbed for dozens of years. The records of General Segald, and the records of the research related to Jarrett. Thinking that the secret was right before his eyes caused him to feel excited once again, but before Shin Woo's eyes was Kaok, a skeleton without an inch of flesh remaining popping out and attacking him. Chapter 9. Kuok. TCH. It precisely aimed for Shin Woo with its sharp sword strike. It truly was a perfect surprise attack, but Shin Woo was faster and avoided its attack. He bent his head back and kicked upwards, causing the sword in the skeleton's grip to go flying. Kaok. This is. The skeleton's sword flew directly up and lodged into the ceiling. However, the skeleton seemed unconcerned, fixed its gaze at Shin Woo, and charged. It seemed as though its mana was focused into its palm, and it attacked Shin Woo for a second time with its hands dyed in a dark green. It's acid, a poison made from mana. It's at a similar level to the great slimes, and if that's the case. It was at that moment. Through his skill in mana analysis, which had noticeably increased due to his mana bone, he was able to grasp the structure of his enemy's skill, and at that very moment, the bone he had absorbed before. The acid ghoul's thumbnail awakened its potential. You have learned the active skill, Intermediate Acid Poison Spray LV1. Strength and magic have increased by 15. Low-rank acid resistance has become LV7. You have achieved the feat of acquiring an intermediate skill. All stats increase by 5. Ha! Shin Woo was so astonished that he almost lost control of his mana for a moment. Intermediate. Though the acid ghoul's ability was indeed frightening, when he normally learned a skill, he thought that they'd always be at a reduced level, so he couldn't help but be astonished. Could this also be due to mana bone? He was able to completely reproduce the special properties of the mana within the memories and experiences now, so if all the skills that he was going to learn in the future started at a high level, then him learning the mana bone skill would have been the best thing that happened to him ever since he was dropped into the Empire. Hute. Juwok. The deep green mist that rose from his fingertips softly wrapped around the skeleton's palm. At that moment, it yelled in fright and retreated back, colliding with a desk. Shin Woo saw a portion of the documents atop the desk melt away from the poison and freakily yelled out. Hey, calm down. Acid poison. Who are you? Fortunately, the skeleton stopped when Shin Woo spoke. No. Perhaps it regained feeling after seeing him use acid poison. Honestly, it was good regardless. His top priority was to calm it down if he wanted to preserve these precious documents and prevent further damage. I'm one of Jarrett's people. Shin Woo slowly stepped back and led him away from the materials, so that they wouldn't be damaged, and answered him calmly. He had already begun acting by the time he realized that he needed to proceed delicately. And he was able to say the lines most suitable for the situation. Jarrett. His hand paused its strike midair. He had hit the mark. You're a subordinate of Dr. Jarrett Ataran? I don't recall seeing you before. Are you part of the guard? No, I'm not a guard. If I was, I would have died with you. I came by his request. Did Dr. Ataran die? That's natural, I suppose. The skeleton despaired and dropped its head. Seeing that, Shin Woo was actually surprised. He had thought he needed to calm it down no matter what, but he didn't think that one line would calm it down. The moment the skeleton got a hold of itself, a message appeared in front of Shin Woo. The acting skill has become LV5. Those who listen to your words will instinctually have a good impression of you. Your body is black. Huh. It's because of the poison. Your poison's really strong. Yeah, our tests were like that. Now I remember a little bit. At around that time, the skeleton had completely lost its fighting spirit. It inspected Shin Woo, and when it subsequently turned to look at its own body, which was likewise composed of only bones, it muttered miserably. Our test ultimately failed. We couldn't stop ourselves from turning into undead. In the end, that foolish emperor tried to prevent disaster by calling an even greater disaster. Those words felt as though Shin Woo had just been hit by a straight punch. It had clearly recognized that it was an undead, and was also aware of the passage of time. Was this perhaps an effect caused by them performing tests within the sewers? If that's true, then in the Empire, Shin Woo did his best to conceal his astonishment no matter what, and replied to the skeleton. However, you're better off than the guys outside. Since the guys outside have lost their reason and are going wild. Is it a half success? Come in, comrade. If I think about it, you, who knows the code for the anti-skull, can't be my enemy. It seems as though I had also lost my reason until just a little while ago. Since all I did was despair alone from within here. Thanks. Anti-skull. Huh. It definitely had a connection with the skull pattern drawn on the door lock. There was a small chance that it was just a code name, but there was a high chance that it stood for the organization of their group as well. Shin Woo decided to remember that word. Did you move around by yourself? If not, are you acting based on General Seagal's orders? No, I'm acting based on Jarrett's request. I need to collect all the research materials so that it can't be misused. Ah, I see. Those precious materials are spread about in this kind of place. That's certainly an important task. It was really easy to handle the skeleton. Was it because it had just regained its reasoning, or was it due to its memories not being completely intact? If it's not that either, then was it due to his acting skill? If he could handle him as he pleases, then it didn't matter. Shin Woo collected all the materials that remained intact despite the passage of dozens of years. The skeleton even helped him with his task. In the end, he made this request. There may be some of our comrades still out there. Could you help search for them? All right. Since I need to collect all the materials anyway. He was patiently sitting in his seat, and though he really wanted to inspect the materials, the current situation wouldn't allow him to. However, the moment Shin Woo nodded at the skeleton's words, the mana in front of him slightly shook. A quest has occurred. Those who uphold the spirit of a ruined nation. You have found traces of those who still resist in the Empire, and came in contact with them. No one knows how this attempt will turn out in the future. But what's certain is that it will be an extremely difficult challenge. Quest goal: find and aid the poisoned skeleton's comrades. Quest reward: 1 permit for God's secret shop, and 1 LV3 medicine. Does this mean that God is interested in this place too? It would be really unconventional as a hero to listen to their circumstances and act without killing them. However, on the contrary, God wouldn't punish him for it and instead encouraged him to do so, which was really interesting. Of course, regardless of whether God liked it or not, Shin Woo would act as he pleased. How are you going to deal with all of those? I probably have to store them. There's something that Jarrett prepared before he died. As expected of Dr. Ataran, Shin Woo and the poison skeleton confirmed that there weren't any more materials inside the room and left the passageway. As he saw the poison skeleton, which had withdrawn its sword, crawl out of the door. He smacked his lips. Shouldn't you move a bit quieter? You don't need to be that careful. The only things in this sewer are just research material slimes. Yeah, they are just slimes, but, well, whatever. Shin Woo gave up on trying to convince it. When he thought about it, since he had invested so much time into familiarizing himself with Mana Bone, the great slime should have been far away from him by now. It was probably hectically eating up all the other slimes in the dungeon about now. Now that I think about it, I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is... I don't remember my name. It isn't just my name. I don't even remember who I was. I wonder why. I remember the tests and the curse, but there's nothing I remember about myself. It's as though the inside of my head is completely empty. If he was a human instead of a skeleton, he wouldn't seem like a main character, but the world wouldn't remember a mere extra's amnesia. Surprisingly, Shin Woo replied uninterestedly. The fact that your head's empty just means that there's a lot you can fill it with from now on. That's... He'd only said a suitable line he'd seen from somewhere before, yet it seemed like the skeleton was deeply moved. While he was at it, Shin Woo decided to give him some more service. First, let's give you a name. Now your name's Paul. Paul. It's an alright name. What's your name? I'm Paul Zero. It was a name he'd thought up himself, but it was really an alias without a speck of creativity. Then, Paul Zero. This way. I don't remember anything regarding myself, but I definitely remember the way. Great. Let's go. Paul. Shin Woo and Paul moved quickly. He definitely moved a lot more efficiently because he had a guide. No matter how excellent his mana senses had gotten from learning Mana Bone, it took a certain amount of manual labor to find the secret passageways. He was suddenly in awe of his foresight, as he hadn't killed the skeleton and dealt with the issue by just talking. Shin Woo honestly hadn't thought that this was how it would turn out. We've arrived. You see it too, right? Yeah, I'm opening it right away. Shin Woo released the lock more skillfully than before and opened the door. There were 3 skeletons within, but they were just like Paul had been, and had lost their reason. Kayak. Kia. Yeah. I thought you'd be this way. Shin Woo sighed and softly spewed his acid poison at them. It wasn't acid magic, nor was it a curse, and the skeletons that basked in the poison went, in surprise, and stopped moving. It was honestly really funny. The taste of this poison is... It's the taste of an ally. Why, are you a soldier from another test by any chance? To think that I'm a skeleton. A skeleton! Now, I understand your complicated feelings, but I received Jared Ateran's request and you guys are undead that have their reason. We're all friends here, so just calm down for now. Shin Woo perfectly utilized his acting skill and calmed them down. Paul, who saw Shin Woo instantly clean up inside, just carelessly clapped with his bare bone hands. The power in your voice is unusual. As expected, it seems you weren't a normal person after all. What do you think our relationship was in the past? I don't remember. You already said that before, so be quiet and stand over here in order. You're Paul 2, you're Paul 3, and you're Paul 4. The 4 Pauls had a touching reunion, even though 5 minutes hadn't even passed yet. Since they were all composed of bones now, it was difficult to recover their previous form, but they definitely remembered that they followed and trusted the same general, and cooperated with the tests. Moreover, since they were all level 3, they were highly likely to all have had the same post in their past life. To think that you're carrying out Dr. Ateran's will even after becoming an undead. You're amazing. Won't you come with us to meet General Seagal? General Seagal definitely wouldn't have given up on the magic research. I'll probably go and see you guys someday. I'll remember you guys. Shin Woo instantly refused the offer of the Pauls who had reached a mutual understanding, and quickly collected the materials. And in the process, he took a sideways glance at the characters that they used, and the materials definitely weren't written in Korean, but he could naturally read them. It was probably the same reason he could communicate with others, despite never learning the Empire's language. Now, shall we go and check the remaining materials? Hey, but wait, don't you hear something strange from somewhere? Now that you mention it, yeah. Paul affirmed Paul 3's statement. Then, Paul 4, who had gone out of the door before the rest of them, spoke with a slightly stiff voice. I hear the crawling sound of something huge. Quong. Immediately after, a portion of the passageway burst. Beyond it, a huge slime dyed in a dark green revealed itself and faced them. Its truly dreary aura was so heavy that its body sagged, and that heavy acid mist spread through its surroundings. LV4 King Slime. You have found the target of your revenge. When you fight it, all stats increase by 30%. Flames of Revenge receive a 30% additional bonus. Gyurururu. The King Slime, which discovered Shin Woo, forcefully howled and the tough passageway walls began to quickly crack. However, the poison skeletons were terrified and instinctually stepped back. On the contrary, Shin Woo looked pleased and stepped forward. He was slightly disappointed that it wasn't an Emperor Slime, but still, this was great. Let's play. Pudding. Gyurururu. The King Slime responded vigorously to Shin Woo's offer. It seemed like it really missed Shin Woo too. The Pauls looked like they were going to cry when they saw the walls quickly crack as a result of the King Slime's full speed charge. But unfortunately for them, there was no place to run. To cut to the point, the environment they were in wasn't great for running around and playing hide and seek. It was because whenever the King Slime moved, the drain pipes would split, crumble, and spill dirt, causing chaos. The Pauls, who hadn't yet gotten used to their skeleton bodies, flinched whenever that happened. Gurururua. If I can properly see it, then there's nothing to worry about. Shin Woo moved his body, avoiding the King Slime's charge, and comforted the Pauls. However, the King Slime collided with the sewer drain pipes, causing the whole area to crumble, and by seeing this, the Pauls yelled out. If this goes on, the secret facilities will collapse too. What? Certainly, the whole sewer could collapse at this rate. Honestly, it didn't really matter if a worthless sewer collapsed, but he couldn't allow all the facilities to collapse before he got a chance to look over the materials. I have no choice since it's come to this. Shin Woo stiffly nodded his head and retreated. The Paul's attention remained completely fixed on him and followed him. I'll bring more reinforcements, so keep it busy. We can't. That's impossible. No, you guys can do it. I'll make it so you can. Pudding had pierced through the sewer pipes, became covered in dirt, and spread poison while in the process. Shin Woo took a short deep breath, and towards the Pauls, who sported expressions akin to young birds gazing at the mother bird. Of course, skeletons are expressionless so one wouldn't be able to tell, but that's roughly the feeling, as well as Pudding, screamed with all his might. I'm really sorry. By using low-rank Shriek of the Dead, you have caused your enemies to fall into a frenzied and fearful state. You have succeeded in using a skill against an enemy a higher level than you. The low-rank Shriek of the Dead skill has become LV2. Kurururururu. Kuak. Kahik. It's an enemy. The four poisoned skeletons, that had for a time regained their reason, had once again completely lost their reasoning due to Shin Woo's shriek. It was such a heinous act that it wouldn't be strange if the devil came and asked if he could take him as his older brother. Of course, he had expected that it would work on the skeletons, but he hadn't expected that the skill would work on the level 4 King Slime. It might be because it hadn't been very long since it had evolved. Good. You're going to die anyway, so if you're going to die, you might as well shave off some of the slime's health. Shin Woo left a rotten farewell to the Pauls, and rather than say a farewell to the King Slime, which began to struggle in what seemed to be an overlapping frenzied and fearful state, he shot a fire bullet at it, catapulting his index finger plus flames of revenge. He wanted to see if it would self-destruct like a great slime, or if it would have a different response to the fire, but was it because of the frenzied state? It didn't show any signs of self-destructing despite the fire spreading. Shin Woo was satisfied by that fact and retreated completely. You have run away from the target of your revenge twice. An avenger can gladly bear the shame of running away twice. When you encounter your enemy again, all stats increase by an additional 15%. However, running away a third time is forbidden. Quest failed. I ran away from the target of the quest, so it's natural that I failed the quest, but I didn't know the Avenger skill had this kind of option. The fact that running away a third time was forbidden meant that he couldn't just blindly run away from his enemy just because it was scary, or else he may be penalized by the skill. Well, he had thought that the performance of the skill greatly outweighed the risks, but he hadn't expected this kind of surprise hidden within the skill. He thought that there wouldn't be a case where he'd run away from the same enemy 3 times in a row, but there also wasn't a guarantee that it wouldn't happen, so it was truly a difficult situation. However, should I just meekly run away now? If he fought it right now, he was confident that he could win. However, he really wanted to collect all of the hidden materials in the sewers. Especially because he realized now that his Avenger skill overlapped and would increase his abilities even more, so it wouldn't be a loss if he just looked at the result. At best, I'm throwing away the navigator I'd gained into the jaws of death, and it's become a situation where I have to explore the sewers when I don't know when it'll collapse. However, since he'd gone through the hidden facilities pattern twice already, he was just as confident in exploring the sewers. The sole problem right now was that he needed to find the hidden facilities before the sewers completely gave way. It was a good thing I chose to use Shriek of the Dead. It's become considerably quieter. Of course, the duration of his skill wasn't very long, so it should start going wild again soon. So, it was key that he found the facilities before then. Shin Woo used his combat sprint to its utmost and started to dash. The great slime had cleaned the sewers of monsters, so it was completely barren, and if he excluded the dirt that occasionally dropped onto his head, there wasn't anything that got in his way. Found it. Within only 2 minutes, he found the third hidden facility and thoughtlessly opened the door. Surprisingly, there were 5 skeletons waiting with bated breath. He opened the door. You idiot. Who are you? Are you a member of the project? No, it doesn't matter who you are. There's a fearsome monster roaming around outside. This was unexpected. It seems like the catastrophe that befell the sewers after dozens of years of silence, the birth of the great slime, had caused them to independently regain their reason. So, you're planning on waiting until it collapses the entire sewer and then dying together? If you plan on burying the efforts of the general who struggled to stop the curse as well, then stay crouched there. Who do you think you are, to say the general's name here? Does it matter who I am right now? He collected all the materials. Shin Woo gazed at them icily, that kind of feeling, and the skeletons glared sharply at him, and he exited the facility, as if there were no value in saying anything more. After I collect all the traces of our resistance, I'm going to fight that monster in order to open up our future. You guys can stay here, cuddle with your curse-bound bones and disappear. Wait a sec. One of the skeletons grabbed onto Shin Woo's arm bone. Shin Woo, who had felt a bit anxious that he hadn't been harsh enough, secretly felt relieved. If the facility is going to crumble and everyone's going to die, then I'll fight with you. Damn it, I can't go to hell without achieving anything. It's the same for me too. In the end, I may have been too depressed that we hadn't been able to prevent the curse. If you're a knight of the Empire, you have to be able to fight your enemy without fear. Talk is cheap. Prove it to me with your actions starting now. Shin Woo thought it was time to reproach them more, and as soon as he replied frigidly, the skeletons actually seemed to show some pride, and walked ahead of him with heavy footsteps. He thought when he saw them, "Who? It may be because skeletons don't have brains, but I'm telling you, it's really easy to trick them. We have to check the remaining hidden facilities first and then act. Before that, do you each remember your names?" I don't remember anything about myself. All right then, from this side in order, you're Paul, Paul 2, Paul 3. Shin Woo treated the skeletons that he had left behind to fight the King Slime as already dead, so he forcibly took their names and passed them on. It was an extremely wicked and careless naming ceremony, but the Pauls didn't realize it, and were touched as they thought that he accepted them as comrades. They accepted Shin Woo as their temporary leader, so he didn't really need to make up an alias. If I came out strong from the start, I could have finished it without lying unnecessarily. Shin Woo learned a new way to conduct himself based on the situation. If he used the difference of strength between him and his target and said something suitable, they wouldn't probe him, and at the same time, he could set up their relationship such that he was superior. Though even I think it's really not something a hero should do. Around the time that Shin Woo pondered whether he was going in the right direction or not, he finally arrived at the last area. There were 7 poison skeletons within, and they also obediently joined up with him. With this, he had gathered 12 level 3 skeletons, excluding himself. I've collected all of the materials. Now let's go and take care of the monster. Let's go. As they had increased in numbers, it seemed the skeletons inevitably swelled with confidence. Even though they had regained their reason, they were still fundamentally idiots. Anyway, while Shin Woo was encouraging the skeletons and advancing forward, he caught a glimpse of the end of the dungeon. The final secret facility, as well as the adjoining passageway, on the side of the wall, there was a trace that it had been completely torn out. It looked like that was the boss room. It was obvious, but he didn't feel anything in there. What happens in this case? Does it recognize killing the king slime as killing the boss? He had undergone various strange experiences in this dungeon, which was truly odd. The experience he acquired here should be helpful later. He ran while thinking such miscellaneous thoughts, and in no time reached the area where he had first encountered the king slime. You have found the target of your revenge. When you fight it, all abilities increase by 45%. Flames of Revenge receive an additional bonus of 45%. It is your opponent's last chance, as well as yours. Kurururua. The king slime, which had discovered Shin Woo, howled forcefully. It didn't have any traces of the Flames of Revenge on its body anymore. He had felt the connection of mana terminate in the middle and had roughly assumed as much. You weren't able to shake it off at the right time, so your body has gotten a lot smaller, huh? Kua. It acted as though it could understand what Shin Woo was saying, and the king slime's temper flared, though its body had considerably lessened compared to when he had first saw it. It was to the point that he would believe it if someone said it was a slightly big great slime. However, the smaller it got, the more its strength was concentrated in its body. Its strength alone wouldn't lose out to the acid ghouls. Kua. I can't believe it. My bones. Whereas the 12 Pauls murmured to themselves when they saw the 4 big and small bones scattered around the battlefield. Of course, the owner of those bones were all dead. No, actually, they were the skeletons of the original Pauls 1 through 4. They had fought so desperately, so there was no way they'd come out alive from fighting the king slime. Those guys chose to sacrifice themselves in order to keep the results of our tests safe, as well as hide us from the enemy, which allowed me to rescue you guys. Shin Woo chattered away so calmly about them, even though they had died so unfairly. If the original Pauls, who had become bones, had heard him, they would have returned as evil spirits to haunt him. It would be really fun if they came back as evil spirits. You're not going to let their sacrifice go to waste, are you? For the Empire, and for yourselves. We're stepping over their corpses. Ooh. I'll survive no matter what. Even though I'm a skeleton, there's hope if I survive. I'll crush that mushy monster. The effect was amazing. The morale of the 12 Pauls soared, and they each raised their weapons and charged at the king slime. The king slime seemed to find it laughable and spewed its acid poison, though because they were poison skeletons, they weren't harmed very much. Think back to when you were warriors. Dying to a mere slime like that is disgraceful. Shin Woo encouraged the skeletons and comfortably took a pose from the rear. The flames would just cause it to self-destruct, so for now, he planned to fire his grenade, catapult plus self-destruct, to weaken the slime. Then, fire. Gwang! The resulting explosion from the index finger shot inflicted tremendous damage to the king slime, causing it to rampage about. Unfortunately, the 12 poison skeletons fought desperately without reservation, so Shin Woo couldn't attack without them making way. As it had done before, the great slime bounced its body, but even if it tried to crush the skeletons, there were heaps of earth everywhere and its huge body didn't allow it to move very easily. HMPH, it's all going according to plan. Shin Woo confirmed that the situation was going his way, going exactly as planned, though he hadn't actually set up any such plan. He regenerated his index finger and prepared his second catapult. There weren't any skeletons that had died yet. I hope you guys last until the king slime dies. Shin Woo stood behind his human's shields. No, his skeleton shields, and leisurely fired his fire bullet while grinning. That's how he raised the curtains to an extremely one-sided and cowardly battle. Shin Woo, the 12 Pauls, as well as the king slime that tried swallowing them all, were bravely struggling and continued on for no less than 20 minutes. If the environment hadn't been a cramped underground space, the battle might have already been over, but because the king slime couldn't even charge properly, the level 3 poison skeletons were somehow able to stand against it. Put in some more effort, Paul. I'm Paul 10. Gururururua. Nice, you're blocking it well, Paul 10. I'm shooting one more time. The low-rank catapult skill has become LV2. The launching speed increases. Agility has increased by 1. While the 12 Pauls were busy holding off the king slime's offensive, Shin Woo used the Pauls as a moving trench to protect himself. So long as his mana would allow it, he would continuously shoot his grenade. He had thought this before, but there was nothing more reassuring than having reinforcements blocking off the enemy. Gururu! Whenever a portion of the king slime's body burst, it would desperately collect the mana from those pieces, and though it would have been better if the flames had stuck, they at least forced a significant amount of mana to be condensed into its main body. Rather than cleaving its core and killing it, he needed to slowly condense its mana, whether it be by fire or explosions, as that would help him get the core. If it didn't look like a core would come out, then he would use his flames of revenge, even if it meant sacrificing the Pauls. Thankfully, he was really lucky. It's too strong. Hold it back, comrades. Our pain will be the foundation that unlocks our future. Paul 12. In the midst of the intense battle, it seemed as though the Pauls had formed a deep sense of camaraderie. Shin Woo hated his body, which couldn't eat popcorn, and shot a grenade at the king slime. Shin Woo was excited about how many stats its core would give him, and was counting his chickens before they hatched. But at that moment, the king slime quickly rolled its body and dodged the launched finger. What? Gururuk. Shin Woo momentarily did a double take. He then saw that its flesh had been torn off from the constant grenades in the past 20 minutes, and the size of its body had lessened to an extent that it could move now, even in this narrow space. Furthermore, during the battle, a few of the Pauls had died, so there was a gap in their encirclement. At that moment, the king slime didn't lose the opportunity and had begun its counteroffensive. Goruk. Kuak. Paul 3. They couldn't cope with its swift movements and Paul 3 was struck by its charge. At that moment, it focused its acid poison at one point and spewed it. Paul 3 melted instantaneously and in its place, only a single shabby bone remained. Paul 3. Get a hold of yourselves, you guys. Don't lose track of its movements. Shin Woo gritted his teeth and shot a grenade. Immediately after his attack, he would have taken advantage of the explosion's opening and hit it again, but something truly astounding occurred. Before the grenade burrowed into its body and exploded, the shot melted away without a trace. He didn't know what kind of conditions it satisfied to become like this, but he was sure that the king slime's poison had been instantaneously strengthened. It might have even been comparable to the acid ghouls. That bastard. Gurururuk. Then, the king slime emitted a peculiar sound, as if it were mocking them, and vibrated its body. Compared to before, its body was definitely dyed in a deep green. Its poison has gotten stronger. Ours bodies melt away just by getting close. The sickening deadly poison mist filled the narrow space. At that moment, the poison skeletons trembled as they were completely stuck within the poison mist. They had briefly forgotten how terrifying acid poison was after being reborn as poison skeletons. Gurururuk. TCH, It's troublesome if you all die already. The king's slime thought it had an opportunity, and attempted to sweep away all of the poison skeletons at once by spreading its deadly poison, but before it could do so, Shin Woo charged and rammed into its body. In the process of hunting it down, he could sacrifice the poison skeletons one by one, but he couldn't helplessly lose all of his shields all at once. Guruk. Because its body had shrunk, its weight had also lessened. The king slime couldn't endure Shin Woo's charge and powerlessly bounced while being blown away. However, there was something more important than that. Despite being in contact with the strong acid poison, the poison which melted rocks in one fell swoop, he flawlessly endured and was still standing. You have been affected by the king slime's strengthened acid poison. Low-rank acid resistance has successfully resisted 90% of the damage. The low-rank acid resistance skill has become LV8. Good. As long as I don't get stuck inside its body, I can endure it. Since the index finger bone lodged into its body instantly melted away, he was secretly quite worried, but it seems as though his main body was able to endure its acid poison through a combination of his harden and acid resistance skills. Though he did receive some injuries, he could heal this much damage with regeneration instantly. Guruk. It seemed like the king slime realized that Shin Woo wasn't an opponent it could overcome by just thoughtlessly spewing its poison around as it gradually began to retreat. Shin Woo hadn't come at it from the front and just trivially attacked it from the rear with flames or bullets, yet the fact that he actually possessed the toughest body here slightly shocked the king slime. And honestly, the king slime wasn't the only one shocked. How is he still alive even after taking that poison? We can't win. The test was a failure. In the end, we were cursed. By melting us all, that slime will completely bury us in darkness. You guys just sit in the back and watch. The Paul's bones shook, like leaves in the wind, and Shin Woo saw them retreat. Therefore, he decided to completely forego using them as shields any longer. Their willpower was already down in the dumps, and even if they were to step forward once more, he didn't know how much longer they'd last against the king slime. And the fact that the second phase has begun means that the king slime's health and magic are slowly reaching their limit. It's definitely worth a try, as long as I can block its poison. Of course, it still possessed a combination of strength and speed befitting a level 4 elite monster, but Shin Woo was also receiving the Avenger skill effect. He decided that he could definitely win. He forcefully gripped Bone of Thunder lasting with both hands and activated Combat Sprint, taking the initiative by charging at it first. The king slime noticed and quickly bounced its body. Guruk. Hup. It was an absurdly fast reaction speed. If he didn't make full use of his temporarily heightened visual acuity, he would lose track of it. The instant Shin Woo read its trajectory, he vertically cleaved downwards. Ha! He firmly stiffened his body with magic, and his sword fell with a force that could cleave the earth, clashing with the king slime flying in from the front. However, rather than being pushed back, he exerted his strength and pushed downwards with his sword. Goo! The king slime couldn't contest with his strength and bounced away, colliding with the opposite wall. The instant it impacted the extremely precarious wall, the drain pipes completely crumbled and the foundation became unstable. Dirt spewed everywhere, but even within that messy situation, Shin Woo's eyes didn't leave the king slime. Does it also have a harden ability? There aren't any scratches on its body. His sword was plenty sharp. The bastard was just excessively tough. Since its body had lessened in size, its physical strength had atrophied to the point that Shin Woo could push it back, but conversely, its magic had been frightfully condensed. It had gotten that much tougher as a result. Goo! Hup! The slime must have been uplifted after being unharmed by Shin Woo's strike, as it bounced from its position and flew towards him again. If he got pushed back here, it'll be the end. Shin Woo gritted his teeth and clashed with the king slime. With the resolve to take it down, he infused Power Slash in every strike. As I thought, we can't win. If he can't kill it with that tremendous power, then... The poison mist is rising. Since he was fighting while listening to the Paul's draining BGM, it didn't work. No, it was honestly just that his current strength couldn't overcome the king's slime. Looking at the situation of the battle, he figured that if he could buy more time, he would be able to get a decisive strike in, but the problem was, I can't just keep repeatedly attacking and defending until its mana runs out. This sewer facility was counting down to its destruction. The pouring dirt would make it difficult to even move soon. It would become the worst environment to fight in. In order to finish it before then, it would be a bit difficult, but this was the only choice. He resolved himself and activated his skill. Flames of Revenge. The black flames softly blazed atop his index finger bone. Seeing that hateful fire, the king's slime spewed the deadly poison that had been condensed in its body all at once in all directions, and filled the space with poison. Good, you're definitely responding to it. Guruk. The deadly poison mist and his black flames met, emitting a crackling sound. The flames burned the poison and the smoky heat surged. If he just remained like this, both sides would just run out of magic, so Shin Woo raised his index finger about shoulder height, aimed, and postured to shoot. I don't know how many times it'll self-destruct from the flames until it leaves behind its core, but I have no choice. However, before he shot, one of the vacantly watching Pauls suddenly muttered, I remember. He spoke at such great timing that Shin Woo stopped his catapult. It was truly a relief that the king's slime saw the unwaning flames and felt extremely anxious, making it unable to move its body. He didn't know whether they knew about the situation or not, but Paul kept muttering. Before I was appointed as a knight, I applied for this test. Hearing that, Shin Woo furrowed his brows. Did they seriously remember their past at this timing? How? However, it wasn't just him. The other Pauls muttered as well, as if they had promised to do so. I was just a soldier, but due to my performance, I became a centurion. The one who brought me there was none other than General Segald. I respected the emperor. Because of that, I couldn't pardon his mistake, even more than the others. How could I forget? The way I had lived, the way I must live from now on. All of it was within me all along. In no time, this space, which had been filled with the thickening, deadly poison the king's slime had spewed, became clean. Even now, the king's slime was responding to the flames of revenge and was creating acid poison, but the poison skeletons were absorbing it all. The test. Was it not a failure? It failed. It was truly a horrific failure. However, because it was a failure, there was something we could gain from it. How miserable! However, we need this strength right now. There was nowhere to run. They couldn't escape from the acid poison, and the skeletons had no other choice but to accept it. And the moment they gave up on everything, they naturally absorbed the acid poison as if it were theirs from the beginning. The skeletons were starting to become stronger. The vestige of their past test's failure had made it possible. It was at this moment that their past karma was connected to the present. Why did I forgot how to use mana? It feels like someone had locked me in the darkness and stripped away my reason. I can't remember my past name at all, but it's fine now. We've become able to accept both our past and present. We don't need to think deeply about what's within anymore. We just need to walk the path we've been taught now. Their voices sounded much more sure of themselves now, and for some reason, they felt even stronger. The moment he thought that it seemed as though they had leveled up, a deep mana glaringly surged. However, because Shin Woo didn't have any eyes, he was able to properly behold the poison skeletons change. LV3 Acid Skeleton, Paul. LV3 Acid Skeleton, Paul 2. LV3 Acid Skeleton, Paul 4. LV3 Acid Skeleton, Paul 7. LV3 Acid Skeleton, Paul 9. LV3 Acid Skeleton, Paul 10. LV3 Acid Skeleton, Paul 12. To think he'd see the moment that the undead were reborn as named monsters. They became named monsters with the names he'd given them at that. Shin Woo was stunned and looked at them with his mouth wide open as the Pauls walked with heavy footsteps more vigorously than before and joined up with him by his side. Sorry we showed you something so unsightly, Captain. We'll fight with you now, too. Give us the command. I want to respond to the chivalry you showed, Captain. When the hell did I become your captain? And what the hell do you mean by chivalry? Is how he eagerly wanted to reply, but Shin Woo discarded all those thoughts. Though the Empire was incorrigibly cold and arrogant, he acted as though their empire was the only warm place in this world. You've finally gotten a hold of yourselves. Hold it back for a bit. You can do that much, can't you? Yes, sir. Of course. The 7 level 3 elites attacked the King Slime simultaneously. The King Slime attempted to kill them with its poison and charge attacks, but they were no longer the weak skeletons of the past. Ultimately, while it was restrained by the skeletons, Shin Woo took the opportunity to shoot his fire bullets in a volley. As it was being barraged with the fire bullets, it didn't even have an opportunity to self-destruct and died from the flames. It was truly a brutal victory. You have hunted the LV4 King Slime. You have acquired the title, Slime Hunter. All of your abilities increase by 20% against slime-related monsters, and you have a higher chance of acquiring better loot from them. You have perfectly cleared the mutated dungeon, the LV2 Feet Secret Sewer. You have found all the secrets that lay in the dungeon, as well as slaying an elite monster that ate the boss and became stronger. You have acquired the dungeon clear reward. Health and magic has increased by 2. You have led several subordinates into battle and defeated an enemy a higher level than you. All stats have increased by 1. The beginner command skill has evolved into the low rank level. When you make a command that fits the situation, the morale of your men increases. You have succeeded in your revenge. The beginner avenger skill has become LV7. When you meet the target of your revenge again, all abilities increase by 34%. They were all messages that appeared from him killing the King Slime. However, Shin Woo felt slightly disappointed that he hadn't received another karma token, but right then, a message appeared that went beyond his expectations. You have achieved the karma of giving the undead who had lost everything a name, and awakening their rebirth. This is a karma that has long since been forgotten, and is a karma that no one can remember. You, who endowed these cursed and rotten individuals with unknown potential, will be called this by the world. The Joker. The trickster karma has been absorbed by the Joker karma and has been strengthened. Your future is unknown, such that no one can predict it, and is filled with countless changes. No one can tell you what to do, and no one can dare block your path. Through a dramatic event, your karma has strengthened. All stats have increased by 10. The acting skill has become LV6. The low-rank mana bone skill has become LV6. This is. Shin Woo felt a strength that was greater than any other before permeate his body. Although it might be similar to the trickster karma, the Joker karma was a more powerful karma, so perhaps that was why. As proof, all of his stats increased by 10. Aside from when he leveled up, he had never experienced such a shocking stat increase. Moreover, his skills had grown as well. I feel like Captain's become even stronger. He's someone who could give us names. That's natural. Those were truly powerful flames. The 7 surviving Pauls, who had been reborn into elite acid skeletons towards the end of the intense battle, saw Shin Woo becoming even stronger following the battle, and said, as expected, while nodding their heads. Ah, you guys. Shin Woo suddenly realized they were there and turned around. When he thought about how they had essentially given him the Joker karma, he had no choice but to change his attitude towards them. Have you recovered all of your memories? Not all of them. However, I realized who I am and what I have to do. This is all because of you, Captain. All of them, without exception, were dyed in a deep green, but the fact the weapons they possessed also changed color was truly peculiar. Though their levels didn't change, their bones were tougher and thicker, and their spirit was no joke. We have to find General Sagald. He definitely hasn't given up yet. He must be struggling to save this curse-ridden empire. Like you, Captain. The General will welcome you with open arms. Let's go together, Captain. It was a development that he had roughly expected. Shin Woo picked up the dropped items and acted as if he thought deeply about their request, but truthfully, he already had his answer. I can't right now. How can that be? Since I have something I need to do, too. I'll go find General Segald later. It'd be great if I could see you guys then. General Segald was someone that was really on his mind too. However, even so, Shin Woo was much too weak to go and find him immediately. His abilities were far too lacking to respond to this situation right now. Above all, he didn't think that there was any reason to limit his movements this early. Not only did it not fit with his Joker karma, there were plenty of other things on his mind regarding the Empire. Like General Leofield. Is that so? Well, you have your own calling, Captain. We can't get in the way of that. We trust that no matter where you are, whatever you're doing is for the Empire. All the Pauls agreed and nodded their heads. Seeing that, Shin Woo smiled bitterly. These guys have already recovered their reason and their memories. It'd be great if I could continue to bring them with me as my subordinates, but there's a high chance that they'd catch on to the lie in no time. In the end, his acting skill was impromptu. At least, for now that is. He would need to hide his human nature and the truth of his identity from them. Even then, taking this many of them with him was definitely impossible. If that's the case, then he could also cleanly take care of them here and take their bones, but... Shall I give it a rest? It wasn't a matter of them forming comradeship from fighting together or something like that. He was just purely curious how they, who were created by the Joker, karma, would turn out from now on. He couldn't relax at all when he thought about how these skeletons, who were endowed with a different destiny because of him, would survive from now on in this empire. And honestly speaking, even if it were a sandcastle built on the beach, it would be too much for him to break down himself. Wherever you go, don't go dying quickly. After all, it'll feel like what I did was meaningless then. Of course. We won't let the names you gave us be in vain. Paul 0. I'll never forget your name. Let's meet again for sure. The skeletons, who realized that they couldn't convince Shin Woo, each said some parting words to him and turned around. The sewers were already a mess and collapsing, and the space they were currently in wasn't wide enough to even stretch their legs, but they grouped together and spread their acid poison everywhere, allowing them to easily make a path. It was as if they used an eraser to erase the dirt. Now, let's see. He drove away the restlessness he felt after the acid skeletons, the Pauls, left, and completely raked in the loot buried in dirt and poison. Shin Woo concentrated on that task, and was able to soon forget about those that had left. You have acquired 53,080 Perium. You have acquired LV4 King Slime Bone Core. You have acquired LV3 Poison Skeleton's Rib Bone. Would you like to? With the LV3 Poison Skeleton's Rib Bone, there was an inherent mana within, so he was able to find them quickly. He naturally received the loot from the King Slime, but he also received the bone from one of the poison skeletons that had fought before him. He was naturally pleased when he found a safely remaining bone from their depressing solo act. Shin Woo shoved the acquired Perium into his inventory, then activated Bone Reinforcement, cleanly using up both the bone and the core all at once. Through Bone Reinforcement, strength has increased by 1, agility by 1, health by 6, and magic by 9. Absorbing a portion of the target's memories and experiences. The low-rank Bursting Thunder skill has become LV6. The low-rank Hardened skill has become LV2. The intermediate Acid Poison Spray has become LV2. Despite it being level 4, the King Slime didn't give him as much magic as he had hoped. Was it because he had already hunted several other slimes and great slimes before? Perhaps his magic stat had increased far too much already, so it was difficult for the maximum value of his magic stat to increase any further. Still, I'll be level 4 soon. Let's hang in there a little longer. He had gained karma and improved his stats through Bone Reinforcement, so now his stats totaled 756. As long as he gathered 44 more stats in the future, he would be reborn as a level 4. He tightened his fists, as if he realized how he was getting stronger more and more quickly. It was good. Finally, he surveyed his surroundings. He thought there might be something he had missed, and there really was. That was none other than the dungeon reward. And now that I think about it, there was a message like that. In a level 1 dungeon, the reward would be an old wooden box, but considering how it was a level 2 elite dungeon he'd cleared, there was a considerably sturdy and completely new-looking wooden box that had appeared instead. Though the fact that it was a wooden box ultimately hadn't changed. 20,000 Perium. Low-rank acid resistance skill book. LV3 Grizzly Bone Leg, +1. LV3 Melting War Axe. Shin Woo's face paled once he checked the rewards. Should he says it's as expected of an elite dungeon? Setting aside the Perium and the acid resistance skill book, he was rewarded with 2 level 3 items. Moreover, the Grizzly Bone Leg was lower body armor that completely covered his thighs, knees, legs, and even his feet. It was even made of bone. Grizzly Bone Leg +1. LV3. Durability, 740/740ths. Defense, 105 to 115. Options. Increases strength by 5, agility by 5. Now it's perfect. He had a helmet, upper body armor, and lower body armor that also doubled as combat boots. Though it was somewhat troubling that all of his defensive equipment was made of bone, at least people wouldn't be able to tell that he was undead just from his exterior appearance now. When he banged on his lower body, which was completely covered up by the Grizzly Bone Leg, he sported a satisfied smile. He collected the Perium and thought about reading the low-rank acid resistance skill book on the spot, but decided against it. Let's give this to Jin. When he thought about Jin, whose body couldn't endure the acid ghoul's poison and had been melted away, Shin Woo decided it'd be better to give him the skill book, rather than raise his proficiency by a little bit. Then, he put the skill book into his inventory. The problem was the final remaining item. The axe clearly gleamed in a metallic color, and it was so large that he wondered how it had fit inside the wooden box. Just by sitting still, the axe emitted a green mist, and because of that, the surrounding earth gradually melted away. Seeing just that, he knew that it was an incredibly powerful weapon. That's how he saw it, but it's not made of bone. He had to gamble after finally acquiring a level 3 item and change it into bone. Shin Woo sighed deeply. However, there was nothing he could do about it. He couldn't just leave it here. Hup. Through bone reinforcement, the melting war axe is changing. In the end, he tightly gripped the axe with trembling hands. At that moment, that axe emitted a hair-raising sound and began to change into bone. Bubbles surged up above the blade and the fundamental metal portion changed. The sequence of mana was newly formed and the shape morphed. It was an extremely unpleasant process. But why? During that process, Shin Woo felt as though his mana, or more precisely acid, was sucked into the axe. The weapon was radiating light, and the mana in the entire area resonated in that one spot, creating an even thicker mist. When the acid mist that the weapon spewed out became even thicker, and thus made it difficult to ascertain its very shape, the once thick mist in the periphery was suddenly sucked into the weapon. The mist was completely lifted and the light likewise cleanly dissipated. For the first time, he was able to see the double-bladed axe which had transformed into bone. You have acquired the LV4 Melting Bone Double Axe. Melting Bone Double Axe. LV4. Durability. 1. 551,550ths. Attack power. 480 to 760. Attribute. Acid LV3. Options. Strength +25, agility -5, effectiveness of acid attribute skills +20%. Shin Woo momentarily couldn't believe his eyes, but when he thought about it, he didn't even have eyes, so there was no way he saw wrong. The item really had leveled up. He had thought that this would happen sometime or another, but he didn't actually think it would happen like this. It didn't level up just because I was lucky. He had realized when his magic transformed into acid poison and was sucked into the weapon just a little while ago. Perhaps during the process of transforming the weapon into bone through bone reinforcement, some other power that he had was somehow activated? And if that's the case, wasn't this proof that the stronger he got, the stronger the weapon that transformed through bone reinforcement would be. It's a really, really fearsome skill. Shin Woo gritted his teeth at the countless abilities that bone reinforcement possessed. Perhaps this skill, depending on the karma, could affect the very rules of this world. Through the use of countless experiences and memories, he learned a variety of abilities, and changed countless things through those abilities. His compatibility with the Joker karma was also great. But, wait a second. With this, he now had 2 level 4 items. And they were both items that would increase his acid attribute skills. If he combined the 2 items' abilities, the power of his acid skills would increase by as much as 30%. Shin Woo tightly gripped the double axe and muttered satisfyingly. He could feel it. That even though it had calmed down, he could spew out a horrific concentration of acid poison whenever he wanted. If I use this well, I could even go with the Hydra concept. Shin Woo still couldn't get rid of his habit from the trickster quest.